Good evening. My name is Mukesh Kumar. I am the director of Indo-French Center, which is there, called STIP, one of the organizers of this kind of lectures, which is called STIP, Science, Technology, Innovation Policy Forum. And it is indeed our pleasure to welcome Professor Vijay Raghavan, the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, and Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, former Indian diplomat, and my STIP colleague, Mr. Sunit Tandon, the director of India Heritage Center. And we are not represented today by Terry and CSE, but they are all partnering with us on this STIP. First of all, sir, congratulations to you for acquiring such a prestigious position, which is Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India from April this year. And we are very fortunate to have you here, and we will listen your valuable views and experience by your lecture on the important topic. And very proudly, sir, I can share this with all the members and all the distinguished guests here. And we are very happy to have the Secretary, Department of Science and Technology, Professor Ashutosh Sharma here, who is the co-chair of Indo-French Center, STIP. And very proudly, sir, Professor Vijay Raghavan has been associated with STIP as a principal investigator of two projects in past, during 2002 and 2015. And in fact, he has also co-chaired the STIP during his tenure as a secretary, Department of Science and Technology in 2014 and 15, earlier 15. And to give you a little bit background about STIP, this is a forum which was created in 2017, in September 2017, to disseminate and generate knowledge for the societal benefits. And in fact, there has been 9 lectures so far earlier in last 9 or 10 months. So effectively, we are organizing 1 lecture every month. So these lectures have been in very important topics like SDG, which is Sustainable Development Goal, urban mobility, foreign policy, climate change, affordable healthcare, that has also been one of the lectures which was organized here, artificial intelligence for healthcare, that was another lecture which was organized. And today we are going to have a very important one, is future of the science, technology and innovation in building knowledge economy. And the next one will be again quite similar, but definitely we are going to discuss the future of science and technology and innovation by Professor Ashutosh Sharma on 13th of July here. And with this, sir, we all are look forward to have your lecture here, and I'm sure that everybody who is present here, the distinguished guests, the foreign diplomats here, the scientists, policymakers, many people are here. They all are going to be benefited with your lecture today. So now may I request Mr. Sunit Tandon to convey his remarks from IHC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mukesh Kumar. I think it goes without saying that we are extremely proud of the STIP lecture series that have commenced under the guardianship of my predecessor, Mr. Rakesh Kappar, with the coming together of so many of our institutional members and also others, interested parties. I'm truly grateful to Dr. Mukesh Kumar and his organization, which is the Indo-French Center for the Promotion of Advanced Research, STIP, by its French acronym, I'm extremely grateful also to Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, which has played a seminal role in organizing these lectures. Professor Sachutta Chaturvedi, who's the head of that organization, is unfortunately not available to be here with us today. To Terry, to the Center for Science and Environment, to Vigyan Prasar, and also to, of course, all our other stakeholders, and particularly to all the very interested audience members who turn out in large numbers for all of our lectures. Today we are really fortunate to see that we have a great gathering, and also welcome Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, who is the best placed person, I think, to speak on the topic that we have today, which is science, technology and innovation in building a knowledge economy. And I'm really delighted that Professor Ashutosh Sharma, the Secretary in the Department of Science and Technology, is also present amongst us, and that you will also, sir, be delivering a lecture next month in this series. So without further ado, I just wanted to mention that we are very fortunate that two of the members of the dais and Professor Sharma, they're all products of the IITs, two of them from IIT Kanpur and one from IIT Kharagpur. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Bhaskar Balakrishnan as well, who himself is an IIT product and a PhD in physics, and I request him to please chair this session. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sunit. Good evening to all of you. Dr. Vijay Raghavan, Dr. Mukesh Sharma, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, and distinguished members of the audience. It's an honor for me and a pleasure to introduce Dr. K. Vijay Raghavan, who has recently taken over as Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, as well as the Chairman of the Scientific Advisory Committee to the Cabinet. This places him at the center of India's science and technology policy making and foresight, and to give a fresh boost to India's efforts to become a knowledge power. It is therefore very appropriate for us to hear him on the subject of science, technology and innovation in building a knowledge economy. Earlier, he was Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology from 2013 to 2018. In this role, he launched a major new initiative, the Marine Biology Initiative, aimed at charting India's biodiversity in collaboration with numerous organizations in India and abroad. Dr. K. Vijay Raghavan, as you may have read, has had a very impressive background as a scientist, an institutional builder, and as an administrator. He began his education at IIT Kanpur in chemical engineering, went on to do his PhD in molecular biology at TIFR Mumbai, and then did postdoctoral work at the California Institute of Technology, USA. His work has focused on developmental biology, genetics, and neurogenetics, and is multidisciplinary in character. The National Center for Biological Sciences, NCBS, was established by TIFR in Bangalore in 1992, and Dr. Vijay Raghavan played a key role in setting it up, and as director of that institute since 1996, in building up this institution into what it is today, overcoming numerous problems. He continues as a distinguished professor in developmental biology at NCBS. He is the recipient of numerous honors and awards. Some of these are the Padma Shri in 2013, Bhatnagar Prize 1998, Fellow of the Royal Society of UK in 2012, and Foreign Associate of the US National Academy of Sciences in 2014, to name only a few. We all look forward to hearing your presentation, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Ambassador Balakrishnan, Mr. Sunit Tandon, Dr. Mukesh Kumar, and all of you for being here this evening. I must say that looking at the audience and your expertise, I should probably just not talk and we should just have a discussion. Probably that will save some time. But nevertheless, I'll try to quickly outline some of the key aspects of science, technology, and innovation, and try to link that up to our economic challenges and growth. Before I start, however, I should say that I just heard a little while ago that we lost Professor H.Y. Mohan Ram, who was a famous botanist and built up the Delhi University Botany Department and was one of the leaders there, and was also a really top scientist in the country. And it's a great loss to Indian science, and it's very sad to hear of his passing. Now, if you look at science, technology, and innovation in the context of India, the challenges which we face are enormous, and we consistently are accused of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and we constantly seem to be engaged in beating our chests and bemoaning how badly off we are compared to one country or the other. The fact is that both in terms of the way we have developed economically and grappled with the challenges post-independence, and the way our science has developed has been actually quite extraordinary. It may not have resulted in us being an advanced country, but that's not because of science or technology. It's because of a complicated set of reasons in which science and technology and innovation play a part. And therefore, to look at science and technology as a problem in India's not having grown is perhaps misplaced. And to look at science and technology and innovation as the solution for India's future could also similarly be misplaced. Growth is a complex phenomenon which requires politics, economics, sociology, global events, contingencies, everything to come together. And science and technology sometimes can play a very important part. But I'd like to say that this is a time in the history of the planet and the history of India where indeed science and technology can play an important part. So the question is how and what can we do to participate in that? So I'd like to divide the initial part of my talk into two components. First is to run through very briefly the various revolutions in history where science, particularly technology, has had an important impact on the growth of the global economy recently. And second, what are the kinds of challenges India faces? And third, what can we do so that science and technology can be a major driving force, as I think it can, in today's world? Today's world, by the way, there are two views. One view, two Western views. One view is that we have created a huge mess in the planet. We have interfered with it too much. We have created new machines, new demons, and this is going to be, we are on a runaway train to disaster. This is a view held by many philosophers, some scientists, and so on. Another view is that there are extraordinary advances in science and technology, extraordinary new tools which we have developed, and no matter how big the problem, we can actually solve it if we all work together and use science and technology. And these are two extreme views, and reality often lies in between. But the fact is that given the state of the planet and the rate of change in the planet, the process of dealing with what we have to deal with cannot be a slow linear process. Things will have to move fast. And if we can interfere correctly, that interference has to be very strong and rapid. Historically, the growth of today's world can be seen sometime at the start of the Industrial Revolution, where the development of new technology founded on discoveries in basic science resulted in a change in the global pattern of rule by some countries moving away from being mere trading powers to actually getting into manufacturing. that manufacturing resulted in the generation of raw material from the colonies, the effective plundering of colonies, to feed into the machinery of industrial growth. So the rapid growth one saw with all the squalor of factories in Manchester and in other places, which stimulated Marx to write about in his Communist Manifesto, came from raw material from all over the world and resulted in the creation of wealth for some. But it also resulted very soon in the creation of the welfare state. And this wealth was distributed and resulted in the powerful countries which led the Industrial Revolution to become even more powerful. After the Second World War, this grew to a large manufacturing sector and a large welfare state in Western European countries, the growth of the economy similarly in America, and both these engines of growth were driven not just by an importing of raw material, that was an important component, but the export of goods, processed goods on a scale which was impossible to foresee a little earlier, and therefore markets all over the world became captive to the industrial growth in the West. Power, literally, was generated in the West. Industry grew in the West. Industrial products from the West, if you were part of that economy, reached you, and consumer economy grew in those countries rapaciously. Rapaciously, I mean that the environment in Western Europe and in America was also plundered and helped in this growth. Later on, two important aspects came about. One was the realization of environmental disaster, and that needed to be curtailed. And the other, the science-driven creation of new technologies, new tools, such as the internet, new ways of manufacturing, which resulted in the electronics revolution, for example, the internet revolution, and resulted in a very, very different way of industrial growth. And that seemed to be, both in theory, possible to be environmentally friendly in some aspects at least, but also dramatically transformative in the kinds of technologies which came at hand. So these technologies resulted in what we see today in our motor cars compared to what we saw in the motor cars when we were kids growing up. When you were a kid growing up, some of us at least, you could open the bonnet or hood of your car, and if you understood the principles of the internal combustion engine, if you had some rudimentary idea of what was going on, you could actually see how a car worked. Today, if you open up the hood of a car, it's very difficult to intuitively see how it works. If you open up the back of your electronic watch today, you can't figure out how it works. But 20, 30 years ago, if you opened up a watch, you could in principle figure out how it worked. So there was a dramatic transformation in manufacturing from an ability to understand the insides of technology, the principles of every aspect of technology, how a plane flew, and you could actually open up a propeller-driven plane and see how that happened. You could actually build one in your backyard. All that has changed dramatically. Today, the building blocks of many of the components of science and technology as applied to society are exactly that. They're building blocks whose insides we are not familiar with. This resulted in a phenomenal growth not only of technology, but because of the link between this technology and the growth of computer science and the internet. The next phase, which we see today, is the development, on one hand, of cyber-physical systems, of ways by which the computer aspect, the software aspect is related to the hardware in seamless ways, in huge ways. But also philosophically, it has resulted in the creation of a cultural construct amongst us where we are tied so irrevocably to our instruments of information, such as the phone and the computer and other devices which act on our learnings from them, that we have an extended phenotype well beyond our bodies. So we have consequences on the planet. We have an understanding which we derive, which is in some ways far, far more complex than each of us as units in the brain. So therefore, our reach as humans has changed rather dramatically. And this is again a philosophical issue which keeps coming up about what is the meaning of our society, our structures in these kinds of contexts. But that aside, it has resulted in another kind of manufacturing and an environment where potentially is exploitative. And that is, while there was a growth a short while ago, a decade or two ago, which was driven by labor arbitrage. You had cheap employment, manufacturing plants of the highest technology came to you. You had a research capability, the best research labs were established in your environment, so that you could contribute there, and this products which you made, whether it's in Philippines or Indonesia or Bangladesh or India, were exported to the West where the markets were. The manufacturing was very cheap. That's changing dramatically now. Because of the way manufacturing is changing now, large companies are going to have sites of manufacturing very close to where their large consumer base is. If that large consumer base is in countries such as India, they will have it here. If those large consumer bases are in the West, they'll have it there. But you're going to have a big challenge in all these large populated economies of having a cost arbitrage or a labor arbitrage driving industrial presence. So there is a major challenge in today's economy for countries to see how they place themselves in this period of economic growth, where both there's an alienation from science and technology amongst large numbers of people. People use telephones and airplanes and motor cars to get to the sites of their activist meetings, where they'll protest against the use of simple technologies because they feel that they are demons which will steal their independence and so on and so forth. There's a communication breakdown. While the use of technology is increasing, the communication about how science and technology can operate in beneficial ways, sometimes not, sometimes yes, that debate has gone past easy, rational discussion. We also have a situation of economic growth which took place in some countries as a result of substantial investment in science and technology. China, of course, is the big elephant in the room. It had 3 decades of over 8% growth, and that resulted in the pumping of huge amounts of resources in science and technology. Many scientists in India, in the West, deprecated that investment and said that was merely investment purchasing technologies of various kinds, mimicking the metrics of science, but not the depth and the talent in science. But you talk to anyone today who goes to a science meeting in China in any subject, however obscure, there are no shortage of experts in that area who are really very good. China has also invested rather substantially in quality basic science education in every single area, whether useful or not. Whether it is environmental science, whether it is botany, whether it's paleontology, whether it is condensed matter physics, whether it's astrophysics, Chinese have invested in a huge manner across the institution. The question is that investment the way to go, right? Is there no other route open to us as an equally large country to invest and grow except follow the Chinese model? Or are there other models? Countries such as Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Switzerland, these countries have invested disproportionately high levels not only in science but aggressively in basic science. They have resulted in becoming superpowers, each in their significant manner, in areas of technology which have impacted on their economy. But it would be argued that if you look at Korea, if you look at China, the argument would be that despite all these investments, they are not considered world leaders in basic science. The argument is that much of the extraordinary innovation, the discoveries, the knowledge comes from Europe and from America, and these countries have the ability, because of the investment, to purchase intellectual property or to develop consequential intellectual property and develop their economy. That criticism, as I said, will change as China starts going from a lag phase to an exponential growth phase in terms of quality scientific output. We're going to see that soon. Japan, for example, decided to do something which is interesting from the Indian point of view. About 20 years ago, it bemoaned the absence of Nobel Prize winners in Japan in Japanese science, even though there were several already at that time, and took a categorical proactive measure to develop teams of scientists in specified areas who would crack major international problems, with much of the team subsuming themselves to the face of a leader who became the face of that project and therefore became a candidate for an individual-centric prize. It's a very unusual Japanese way of doing it, and it's probably untenable in a situation like India, where there's a high level of individualism working at sometimes together, but oftentimes at cross purpose. So these are the kinds of backgrounds we have. What are the challenges we face? Our challenges are absolutely enormous. As I've said, we often have been accused of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Every major scientific revolution, as it's happening, has seen our scientists, our thought leaders, sitting with government and trying to embark on a big plan. And usually such big plans take time in India. Sometimes they're taken forward. I think there are some areas where we have done extraordinarily well and taken wise decisions, and these are in space, in atomic energy, in defense, in agriculture, where our investment has been wise and has had enormous real impact. But there have also been many instances, such as the early days of the semiconductor revolution, early days of the computer science revolution, where perhaps we could have done a lot more. In terms of semiconductors, we could have been another Taiwan. We were ahead of the pack. We could have pushed our mathematics and computer science education much more than we have done. And so there are areas where we could have, the early days of the genetic engineering revolution, we were active in a very modest way. We could have scaled up rather substantially. So these are many areas where we could have done a lot better. Chemistry is another area where the new chemistries which have been used both in green chemistry as well as in DNA sequencing technology were some things which were ripe for doing in India and we didn't do. But that's par for the course. Hindsight is always perfect, and you can say what you should have done and you shouldn't have done. But there is a deep problem in the way we take decisions, and that problem has steadily increased despite there also being steady progress. And the problem is the following. We have no sense of time and urgency in taking decisions. The reason is we respect everyone's view in the room, and pretty much everyone has a veto in our decision making. And therefore our persuasive power in committees is keeps on being stressed. Our finance ministry analysts, and this has been true for historical time, it's nothing peculiar today or yesterday. I remember a distant relative telling me when I started my graduate school at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research that he said that he was a finance officer to Homi Bhabha, and he said what a great man Bhabha was and how admirable, and how he had personally stalled 12 major projects of the Atomic Energy Commission, and it was so nice working with Bhabha. The finance mandarin's view of doing something great is to actually say no to something. Not that I facilitated 12 projects, but I actually managed to stop 12 once, as if he had saved the Atomic Energy Commission and Bhabha from, great disasters by stopping this. Who knows? Maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong. But, there's a disconnect in decision making between our finance setup and our science and technology or any other ministry. And this is a colonial hangover which must go at some time. Of all the post-colonial countries, all the British post-colonial countries, I think 2 of them, other than us, still have this system of the finance ministry reporting directly to the Department of Expenditure and not to the Secretary of the Department. These 2 countries, if I'm not wrong, are Pakistan and Singapore. Singapore is an efficient small city-state. It can handle this. Pakistan is Pakistan. We are in the same boat, right? So we should really change this. We should take courage and put the chief accounting officer of every department, the secretary, in charge. But we should also make sure that certain serious and very important and correct laws are interpreted properly and flexibility given. Today, our science mandarins, and indeed our bureaucrats at every level, are caught between the principal purpose of their job is to ensure that they don't get into trouble for what they do. I was very disappointed some 20 years ago when a former classmate of mine who joined the IAS, he was then a fairly junior person, he asked him, I said, it must be really wonderful that you're doing something so important for the government. And he said, yes, and I said, what's your major thought every day? He said, I must make sure that my butt is covered, right? So basically, the attitude which we have inculcated in our bureaucrats is make sure that whatever you do on file is right. It's not make sure that you do something right, make sure you do something valuable, and this is a deep attitude elsewhere. A former cabinet secretary told me many years ago that, and this could be an apocryphal story, I don't know whether it's true, but he said that the entrance exam to the civil service asked, what would you do in the event of a major earthquake? Do everything possible to cause the maximum benefit and rescue. Do everything possible following the rules as far as possible. Follow the rules completely and make sure that the books are all right. Every entering officer ticked A, every senior officer ticked C. Right? And so this is the kind of situation where you can proactively do something. You're exhorted to do all good, and you do it. But the paperwork catches up on you 5-10 years ago. Because there are people who misuse that paperwork, the rules are such that there's an insensitivity to getting things done. That's breaking down, I must say, hugely over the last few years. The science secretaries in particular and others in general in each of their aspects, I'm not that familiar with others, have been extraordinarily proactive. And therefore a collective proactiveness is one way to break this kind of gridlock, and that is indeed happening. But this is a societal challenge where it has 2 other components. So one is the gridlock which you have imposed on it, and the second is one of poor understanding and knowledge. You go to anyone in science, in technology, and you go to most citizens, and you ask them about organizations other than their own. The immediate reaction of most of us is to be extraordinarily critical of other organizations, have a full understanding of how to fix problems in every other organization, but a great reluctance to apply that to your own, right? And therefore, again, we end up in a gridlock when we come to radical solutions. Everyone wants a radical solution as long as it's not applied to their organization, right? Everyone in organization X knows how to reform Y, but not themselves. These are the generic problems. But again, the challenge in a democracy is how to keep all this in mind and still reform. So we have a situation now when our reform strategy and our bringing to science and technology to bear on it requires us to be inclusive in our development. This has pretty much never happened in the history of industrialized economies, that there is a demand to be inclusive on this scale and be inclusive without exploitative of someone else, because we can't say both morally and practically it's not possible to have an exploitative context externally and an inclusive context internally, as many colonial countries did. The second aspect is that the development has to be sustainable. We can't use ways by which they are environmentally unfriendly. It has to be a system which is sustainable. That's another big challenge. The third is dealing with the environment itself. Not only does our development have to be environmentally sustainable, it has to be proactively dealing with important contexts which are human-induced: climate change, global warming, floods, drought, and so on. So disaster prevention and mitigation is a major expense where science and technology has to come in. That was never the case. And all this has to be done in a democracy where I've pointed out the difficulties, but those difficulties are legitimate consequences of a complex democracy. One can't wish them away and say that unless they go away, I can't do anything. We have to work in that setup. So the question is it feasible? Is anything possible? And what is possible and what's being done? And that's what I will end with. What can be done and what's possible? The most effective instrument of power which governments have is policy. And in that, the most effective policy is to lift curbs, lift hindrances, and allow industry, people to do things. The IT revolution is an example, and this can be done in many other areas. One policy change, for example, which would be absolutely fantastic, is to liberate our scientists to actually themselves own the intellectual properties of their work, as Switzerland does, as Sweden does, and have metrics by which they're doing whatever they wish with their discoveries in the lab is something which they own. America does that effectively, and you give back what you choose to your country, to your laboratory or your university. Stanford benefits hugely, not by tying people and their innovators down about rules about what they should do and what they should get back, but giving them an enabling environment and having those who succeed giving back hugely. That's something which is feasible. It requires courage. We constantly try to go down that route and then are caught down by trying to block misuse in various ways. But that can be addressed. The second aspect is something we can learn from countries such as Germany, where the lands in Germany, the states, play a major role in driving science and technology in their context. We have much larger number of states and much more of a federal structure than anywhere else in the world, but states need to have the courage to use science and technology as opposed to already available technologies to drive their development. And this is something which is feasible across the spectrum, from training people to science institutions to applying technology and so on. The ways by which Karnataka takes charge compared to Punjab or Assam would be different, but if they were to take charge of science, basic and applied in their context, in addition to central government roles over there, that driving force, a small amount of budget driven there in an interactive manner, would be enormously transformative. Similarly, our central ministries. Our central ministries, and this is a problem with all of us in every aspect of our lives, each one of them are extraordinarily siloed. That's good because you have deep domain expertise when you're siloed. But when you don't use that domain expertise by connecting, the silos are actually detrimental. One of the major silos is the disconnect between our line ministries and current science and technology. There's a lag period. Our science institutions are actually up to speed, but not connected with the ministries. And our ministries, are doing things which are a bit out of date, and they don't have the mechanisms to connect. It's all very well to say that they must connect, but what we need is an intermediary structure which allows them to connect well. Both of them have different languages, and therefore a translator is needed to connect and affect this, whether it's steel or heavy industry or biotech or whatever. The next point, so it's states, the central ministries, and the third is our industry. Our industry has done extraordinarily well. I mean, they provide manufacturing now, even though it's a very small component of our industrial base, of our exports, quality manufacturing happens in India. Yet it is substantially driven, whether it's generics, vaccines, auto parts, whatever, by high quality reverse engineering, which is not to be sniffed at, and relatively low but growing innovation. The innovation is growing. But the innovation can grow at a more rapid pace. Industry is not cash starved. If they were to partner with academia and invest in research in their context hugely, it would be absolutely transformative. I'm not even talking about industry investment in academia. I'm talking about industry investment in industry. For example, Google's R&D investment exceeds by a few fold the entire U.S. National Science Foundation budget. And this is true of all the big IT players. The University of Michigan's R&D budget exceeds all of India's R&D budget. So our increase in science budget is not going to come magically by government increase of funding alone. That's important. That must happen. But industry investment in R&D must go up rather substantially, as must philanthropy's investment in R&D elsewhere. And that's also ramping up. These two components, I think, are at a late lag phase and will pick up. The partnership between states and central ministries is something which needs to grow. There's one other final component which is extraordinary and which we haven't leveraged enough, and there are ways to leverage it in a manner very different from what China has done. This is our diaspora. In addition to our diaspora, India is unusual in that our science and technology has extraordinary goodwill amongst the best science and technology leaders all over the world. So while we do not have to or may not be able to adopt the Chinese model of buying people back with a combination of loyalty and money, we can certainly have exciting enabling structures in our environment, both industrial research as well as in our regular research labs, which allow people to interact on scale. And that's something which our science agencies, particularly the DST, have driven right now, and we're going to start seeing the impact of that rather substantially soon. So these are the areas where I think things are important. Are we doing anything about this? And I'd like to end by saying that we shouldn't be mourning and chest thumping. Things are actually a lot better today in terms of science and technology and the economy than it was 20 years ago. It's better today than it was 5 years ago in terms of our investment and our coordination. Our problem is that in going from A to B, we don't take a straight line, but we take a spiral, right? And it looks like we're going backwards at times, but we're going slowly upwards to reach the point. We must stop this spiraling, and we must start going in a more directed manner, and that's feasible. How is that feasible? That's feasible if we have structures which allow people to get on with their domain expertise, but also link up with others really well. Just as you have a gene whose code is read to give rise to a messenger RNA, but to make that messenger RNA translate into a protein, you need a transfer RNA. We need a transfer RNA for each of our interfacial aspects, whether it's from academia to industry, whether it's startup to industry, science ministries to other ministries, states, and linking up with each of them. We haven't put in place these structures. And to not put in place these structures, to have no transfer RNA and be very puzzled as to why this messenger RNA is not getting translated into a protein is idiocy. You haven't put in that critical structure in place. And if you don't put in that structure and it doesn't work, it will not happen. You can pour money at all the wrong ends. You can say, this is what we need to happen. But what needs to be done to make that happen are these small things. Those small things have now started being put in place in multiple ways over the last several years, and now we're seeing that coming to fruition. For example, about 3 years ago, the Prime Minister had a group of secretaries looking at all the problems in the country in different areas, and this was a mix of people who are not necessarily in that sector, so finance, agriculture, science, education, and so on. And they came up with ideas on what to do. Some of these points which you're seeing today on lateral entry are a consequence of that. They were not pulled out of a hat. Then there was one more meeting about 2 years ago in which specific domains, groups of secretaries within those domains got in and came up with specific collaborative projects and programs which needed to have people getting out of the silos. So there was a group of science secretaries also which did that. And very interestingly, when the recommendations of this group was presented, the Prime Minister said, you guys have made these presentations about what needs to be done. Now you are in charge of making sure that they're implemented. So people, when they got together, they came up with interesting ideas very objectively, because as I said earlier, we all have good solutions what other people should implement. So people came up with very good ideas because they didn't know that they're going to be responsible for implementing. They were not conservative. They came up with all the best ideas. And then you are told that you have to implement them. That's more challenging. And then these group of secretaries over the last couple of years have been meeting regularly after office hours, week after week, every few weeks, monitored by the Cabinet Secretary to see that you're actually putting this in place. So the Department of Science and Technology has put in major programs for skilling people, for having high-end meetings and workshops, for training women scientists, for putting in place infrastructure, for coordinating that. So these are all things which have been happening. And with all of this being put in place, with coordination systems such as the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor being activated in these kinds of areas, in addition to other ones earlier, I think we're going to start seeing the kinds of impact which use much less resources more efficiently and get greater value, because our investments actually have been extraordinarily creative in our environment. Our ferment and our ideas have been absolutely tremendous. It's just that we need to take courage and have a shared sense of purpose and work together. If we have that, and if we do all of this and communicate this well to our people and get public buy-in, I think science and technology can have a huge impact on the knowledge economy. Science and technology as a force for changing the planet, in a very literal sense, happened in a very horrific way before the end of the Second World War and soon after. The Manhattan Project, creating the atomic bomb, was an example of the consequences of science and technology dominating the future of the planet. The Cold War, similarly, was another example. But there have been other examples of science and technology coming together in a much less stark manner, which have also transformed the planet for the better. The Green Revolution is an example. The global space programs are another example. So today the time is ripe for us to articulate a vision for science and technology to challenge and to take on the big challenges in our complex area and actually deliver to our people. Thank you.